uninsured, 202-585-3881, and pick a line that best represents you. You can also tweet us as well at C-SPAN WJ. We'll take those calls in just a moment. Starting with the Secretary Sebelius, what do we expect to hear this week?
Well, I think that this is the same committee, House Energy and Commerce Committee, the same committee had the contractors in, so I think you can expect a lot of follow-ups. When did you become aware of problems? What specific steps did you take? What was the White House's involvement? Why did you turn off the browsing feature at the beginning? It's there now. Now you can go onto the site and look at rates without creating that account, but why was that decision made? The thought is that if you had someone create an account, you could give them more information up front about do they qualify for a subsidy to purchase coverage, do they qualify for the Medicaid expansion. It would slightly reduce that sticker shock that you will see on the browsing feature, even though on the browsing feature there's all sorts of information explaining you might qualify for a subsidy.
And so has there been indication of how she might respond, or at least the line of response she might give? Well,
so far she's been, and she and other federal officials have been very open that they should have tested more and they should have tested earlier. The Secretary made remarks to that effect. Other officials have done that. And so they will acknowledge what they've done wrong, and they're talking about what they're trying to do now as they see fixes that need to be made. They're trying to do them. They have a heightened sense of awareness that this has to be done, obviously. If you want coverage to start January the 1st, you need to be enrolled by December the 15th. Now, if the majority of users can, in fact, work the site by the end of November, as they're anticipating, then that will help people make that deadline. But I think people are getting a little nervous about the timeline. Democrats in particular, who've stuck their necks out, voted for this bill, are now seeing problems happening with the law, are getting a little concerned as well.
You hear Joe Manchin on Sunday shows saying maybe call for a delay, other people as well. That's got to factor into the discussions going forward?
Sure. Jeanne Shaheen, who's a Democrat of New Hampshire, has talked about that they need to increase the time for the enrollment period. Right now it will end on March 31st, and want a longer enrollment period. Joe Manchin is talking about introducing a bill that would delay the individual mandate and the penalty for a year. So I think that the fact if you've got 10 Democrats with Jeanne Shaheen, you've got Joe Manchin who's working with Johnny Isaac, Senator Republican from Georgia, on the individual mandate delay. We've already seen that vote in the House. As Fred Upton said on Newsmakers, we might see it again, that this is not really where the administration wanted to be with the conversation at this point.
Who expects that November deadline is going to actually be met?
Well, I would say there's a healthy amount of skepticism because, as we remember, I and other reporters sat through these congressional hearings where many of these same officials said we're going to be ready to go on October the 1st, and lots of things have happened. Was it because of increased demand? That'll be one of the things federal officials will talk about. We didn't anticipate we'd have so many people on the site. Others will certainly say to them, well, you should have anticipated that.
To calls. This is Dana, Venice, Florida. He's insured. Dana, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The reason I'm calling is that I'd like to see some consideration by the administration looking into the thousands of embedded Bush political operatives that opted to become GS.
Call can be terminated.
Without objection, so ordered.
I now move to proceed to executive session and consider calendar number 53.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Defense, Alan F. Estevez of the District of Columbia to be Principal Deputy Undersecretary.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Alan F. Estevez of the District of Columbia to be a Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that reading the names be waived.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 also be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I now move to proceed to executive session and consider calendar number 307.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to.
I now send a cloture motion to the desk. Madam President, it needs to be reported. I jumped ahead where I was supposed to be.
The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Office of Personnel Management, Catherine Archuleta of Colorado to be Director of the office.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Catherine Archuleta of Colorado to be Director of the Office of Personnel Management, signed by 17 senators
Madam
as
President, I
follows.
ask unanimous consent that reading names be waived without prejudice to anyone.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session. Oh, Madam President, I'm jumping way ahead of where I'm supposed to be. I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to.
I now move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 242.
The question is on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Thomas Edgar Wheeler of the District of Columbia to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Thomas Edgar Wheeler of the District of Columbia to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask consent the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to.
I now move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 63.
The question is on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, International Banks, Jacob J. Liu of New York to be United States Governor of the International Monetary Fund.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Jacob J. Liu of New York to be United States Governor of the International Monetary Fund, United States Governor of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, United States Governor of the Inter-American Development Bank, and United States Governor of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask unanimous consent that the names be waived, reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to.
Madam President, with your permission, I now move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 209.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Federal Housing Finance Agency, Melvin L. Watt of North Carolina to be Director.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Melvin L. Watt of North Carolina to be Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, signed by 18 senators as follows. Reed of Nevada, Johnson of South Dakota, Begich, Leahy, Coons, Heinrich, Murray, Sanders, Shaheen, Cardin, Franken, Brown, Harkin, Reed of Rhode Island, Carper, Whitehouse, Nelson, and Schumer.
I ask unanimous consent the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to.
I now move to proceed to executive session and consider count number 327.
The question is on the motion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Nay. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to.
There's another cloture motion at the desk. I ask it be reported.
The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination: Patricia Ann Millett of Virginia to be United States Circuit Judge for the District of Columbia Circuit.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that reading the names be waived.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Patricia Ann Millett of Virginia to be United States Circuit Judge for the District of Columbia Circuit, signed by 17 senators.
Madam President, I ask that reading the names be waived.
Without objection.
I also ask consent the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The motion is agreed to. I would suggest the absence of quorum. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Don't do it. Madam President,
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the call of the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the cloture vote scheduled at 5:30 p.m. today be now scheduled to occur on Tuesday at a time be determined by me in consultation with Senator McConnell.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, just so everyone knows, we have a number of senators who aren't going to be here tonight. 5 that I know of, Democrats and Republicans. We have a lot of people who went to a lot of trouble to be here for this vote. And I want everyone to know we're going to continue having votes on Monday, and obviously people think they're not very important, so these don't wind up not coming. So they're going to start missing really important votes. I'm going to schedule more than one vote. It's just not right that we have a few people make things very difficult for everyone. So I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
is the Senate now in a quorum call?
We are.
I would ask unanimous consent that it be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I would also ask that we now proceed to a period of morning business. Senators are allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each. The time be for debate only until 7 o'clock tonight.
Without objection.
And there will be no roll call votes. I announced that earlier, but there will be no roll call votes tonight.
So noted.
Quorum call be vitiated.
We're not in a quorum call. The senator is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam President, before the Internet, RCA knew how many records Elvis sold every day. Before the Internet, RCA knew how many cars, before the Internet, Ford knew how many cars they were selling every day. Before the Internet, McDonald's could tell you how many hamburgers it was selling every day. Yet the Obama administration cannot tell us how many Americans have tried to sign up for Obamacare. They can't tell us how many Americans did sign up for Obamacare. They can't tell us what level of insurance they bought, nor can they tell us in what zip code they live. They've told us that 20 million Americans have visited the Obamacare website. They've got the basic information to shop, but how many have tried to sign up? How many did sign up? Where do they live? What kind of insurance did they buy? Not only have they not told us, Madam President, they've done their best to keep us from finding out. With WikiLeaks and Eric Snowden spilling our beans every day, what's happening on the Obamacare exchanges is the biggest secret left in Washington, D.C. The National Security Administration could learn some lessons from Secretary Sebelius. We shouldn't have to rely on anonymous sources to get basic information about what's happening with Obamacare. Therefore, I'm introducing legislation today to require the administration to answer the following questions every week. How many people tried to sign up? How many people did sign up? What level of insurance did they buy? In what zip code do they live? And what are they doing to fix the problems? This is not complicated information. In the Internet age, the administration ought to be able to provide this information not every week, but every day. In fact, they should be able to provide it every minute. We shouldn't have to pass a law to find these things out. I would hope every senator would support this simple request that this legislation makes. It is a 6-page bill. I'll put it in the congressional record today, and everyone will have a chance to read it. Tomorrow, when everyone should have read it, I intend to ask unanimous consent to pass it. This Congress is dedicated to transparency. I know we are on both sides of the aisle. The administration has described itself as the most transparent administration in American history. So why should we not unanimously pass legislation to ask for the most basic information about what's happening on the Obamacare exchanges? Health insurance companies say that in order to guarantee everyone that they have a chance to sign up for insurance before January 1, which is when the law says they must, the application has to be in by December 15. That's not very far away. And while the administration has been talking about a few weeks of a grace period before the IRS will fine you for not having bought insurance, as Obamacare says most Americans must, still, if the website isn't fixed, millions of Americans will be required to sign up for health insurance on a website that doesn't work, and for not being able to do so, they'll be fined by the Internal Revenue Service. But, Madam President, there's a much bigger problem than the fine, and that is that millions of Americans may be without any health insurance at all after January 1 because their insurance is being canceled because of Obamacare. Remember when President Obama said, if you like your insurance, you can keep it? Well, like a lot of things that have been said about Obamacare, that's turning out not to be the case. Our staff has counted the announcements by health insurance companies that are ceasing to offer policies on January 1 because they don't qualify under the Obamacare law. For example, in Tennessee, the state provides 16,000 Tennesseans who have trouble getting insurance. With some insurance, it's called Cover 10. Because it doesn't meet the exact requirements of Obamacare, the state is having to cancel that insurance on January the 1st, and those 16,000 Tennesseans won't have health insurance. Other Americans, Tennesseans I've talked to, for example, have what we call catastrophic insurance. They have insurance that provides for the catastrophe. That kind of insurance is often not available under Obamacare, not allowed by Obamacare. So insurance company offering these policies will not be offering them after January 1, and as a result, millions of Americans will not be able to buy the insurance they now have. So if individuals can't or won't sign up, that will mean that after January 1, many of the sickest people will go into the exchanges, and the result of that will be the prices of insurance for everyone who has insurance will be going through the roof. We're already seeing that in the insurance markets today. So the bottom line, if the website isn't fixed, millions of Americans will not only be fined by the IRS for not buying insurance on a website that doesn't work, more importantly, they'll be without health care insurance on January 1, insurance that many of them have today. Now, the President has said in the last few days that the website will be ready by November 30th. But, Madam President, you're supposed to have your application in by December 15 and insurance bought by January 1. 2 weeks for millions of Americans to make their way through this maze. We tried to obtain this simple information that I've asked for, yet repeatedly the requests, which I have directed to the Secretary, have come back with no answer at all. No answers, no nothing. Outside analysts tell us that only 0.5% of the people who logged on to Obamacare website in the first week were able to enroll. But we really don't know what's happening there. 2 weeks ago, I sent a letter with the House Oversight Chairman Darrell Issa to Secretary Sebelius asking for the information that she and the President are not now giving us, like how many people have enrolled successfully in the exchanges, what the technical problems are, how much it already costs, and how much it will cost to address these problems. The deadline for a response to our request has passed. Chairman Issa has said, and I joined him in the letter, that he may consider a subpoena to get that information. The American people deserve an answer to these questions. Now, Madam President, often when the debate comes up, someone will say, well, the Republicans don't have any proposals of their own. I've often made those proposals. I remember on this floor of the Senate many times I proposed the steps that we should take to change our health care system so more people could afford insurance. We went back and counted the number of times that during the health care debate, various ones of us talked about our step-by-step proposals for what we should do about health care. And there were 173 mentions of our step-by-step proposals. The basic problem with what happened with the new health care law was that we expanded, the government did. I didn't vote for it, but the government did. The government expanded a health care delivery system that already costs too much. That was the wrong thing to do. That was an historic mistake. What we should have done is to make changes step by step in the health care delivery system that would reduce the cost of health care for the largest number of Americans so that more people could have afforded it. Those are the steps we should have taken. We can still do that. Our health care delivery system is 20% of our economy. Obamacare is not our health care delivery system. Obamacare are some additions to our health care delivery system. Obamacare is an expansion of a health care delivery system that already costs too much. It is making some changes, such as the one we've described earlier in my remarks. Those changes have been described as a train wreck, but we can turn the train around and head it in another direction, the direction of more competition, more choices, and lower costs for Americans buying health care insurance. How could we do that? That's a subject for a long discussion. But here are a few of the ideas. Make Medicare solvent. Trustees have said that in 10 years there won't be enough money to pay hospital bills. We have a duty to make Medicare solvent. Reform Medicare Advantage to increase more choices. Put it on a more level playing field with Medicare. That will provide more options. It should save some money. Make Medicaid more flexible. I was a governor. I said on the floor that every senator who voted for Obamacare ought to be sentenced to go home and serve as governor and try to implement the law. Because from my time as governor, when it was 8% of the state budget, I see it's grown to 26% today in Tennessee, soaking up money that otherwise would go for higher education or for other needed parts of state government. We should encourage workplace wellness. We had a lot of debate about that during the Obamacare debate, and we've ended up with a regulation that's too restrictive. We can change that. We can allow small businesses to pool their resources and offer a larger number of premiums to a larger number of Americans at prices they can afford. We can allow Americans to purchase insurance across state lines. That would reduce the cost of health care, which should be our major goal. We could expand health care savings account. There's a bipartisan legislation before the Senate that would define full-time employment for purposes of the health care law, this one or any one in the future, as 40 hours instead of 30 hours. That would be a great help to American business and a bigger help to the employees who are being forced to go from 40 hours to 30 hours, employees who most need that income and who by going to 30 hours will have to go to a second part-time job in many cases, and in doing so lose whatever health care benefits might have been available to him. I don't know where the 30 hours came from. That sounds like it was made in France. A made in America part-time job ought to be 40 hours. Those are just a few of the steps, Madam President, that we could take to turn the train around and avoid the wreck and move us in the right direction. We'll be making those arguments over time, but for now, we need information about what's happening on the Obamacare exchanges. And I intend to ask unanimous consent tomorrow to pass a simple 6-page legislation that has the administration give us weekly reports about how many have tried to enroll, how many have succeeded, in what zip code do they live, and what level of insurance have they purchased. Congress needs to know that. If millions of Americans are going to lose insurance on January 1 before they have a way to buy it through a website that doesn't work, states need to know it, because as time goes on, these decisions are going to have effect on the Medicaid programs that states are a partner in operating. And Americans need to know it, because in many cases, we've counted at least 1.5 million cases, and we expect millions more. Policies that Americans now have aren't going to be available after January 1, and so these Americans, and these include people working in the Congress, people who are in the Congress, these Americans are going to have to make decisions before January 1 about what insurance they will have, because the insurance they now have isn't going to be available under the new health care law. So, Madam President, this is a 6-page bill and a pretty simple idea. I mean, if RCA knew how many records Elvis was selling every day, if Ford knew before the internet age how many cars Ford was selling every day, if McDonald's before the internet age knew how many hamburgers it was selling every day, surely the Obama administration can tell us every week how many are enrolling on Obamacare's website, how many are successfully getting their insurance where they live, and what kind of insurance they're buying. The stakes are much higher than Elvis's records, than Ford's cars, and than McDonald's hamburgers. These are the stakes of health insurance that involve the lives of millions of Americans, and I hope that my colleagues will join me tomorrow when I ask unanimous consent to approve legislation that will require these weekly reports. Madam President, I ask consent to send the legislation to the desk and that it be introduced.
The bill will be received and appropriately referred.
Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Madam President, tomorrow will be, are we in quorum call?
Senator, we are in a quorum call.
I ask consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Madam President, tomorrow, according to the statement made by the Majority Leader, we'll be voting on the nomination of Richard Griffin for Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. I'll be voting against Mr. Griffin's nomination for General Counsel because I'm concerned about the direction of the NLRB as an advocate more than an umpire, and I do not believe his presence as the General Counsel will improve that situation. As the senior Republican on the Labor Committee working with my friend the Chairman, Senator Harkin, and with others, what I hope we can do over the next several years is look for a long-term solution for the restructuring of the National Labor Relations Board, one that will ensure that it will operate more as an umpire than an advocate, whether the President is a Democrat or a Republican. The board has become far too politicized under recent administrations. This didn't start with the Obama administration, but it's gotten worse with this administration, and it's moved more and more toward the side of union advocacy with such major shifts as ambush elections, micro-unions, and undermining state right-to-work laws. Swinging back and forth on important labor policy issues does the American working man and woman no good in this time of underemployment and unemployment. So hopefully later this fall, I'll be able to join other senators in introducing legislation that will restore balance to the National Labor Relations Board, a proposal that will retain the rights of workers and employees, but reduce the swing that occurs from administration to administration based upon who's in power. What we should be striving for in the NLRB is fairness and consistency. There are exceptions, of course, but as a general proposition, I believe that a president should have an up or down vote on his nominee. So I intend to vote for cloture. But Mr. Griffin's nomination does not do enough for me to show the promise of moving the board from advocacy toward umpire. And therefore, I do not intend to vote to confirm his nomination. I thank the President and I thank Senator Harkin for his courtesy in allowing me to go first. And I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Iowa.
First, I ask unanimous consent that Molly Ganley, Katrina Rogachevsky, and Thomas Hecht of my staff be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Madam President, again, I want to thank my colleague and good friend, Senator Alexander, for a great working relationship on our committee. Obviously, we have differences of views and opinions on matters. That's the nature of legislation and this body, but we have always worked together in a very conciliatory fashion and open and working things out. And so I appreciate his approach on this and the fact that the senator is willing to give us cloture so that we can get an up or down vote. I understand he has certain reservations about this nominee. I understand that. But again, I thank my colleague for being willing to get us to the point where we can have an up or down vote on Mr. Griffin. So, Madam President, tomorrow, we were going to vote today, but it was agreed that the leader came out and there was an agreement on both sides to put the vote off until tomorrow to consider the nomination of Mr. Richard Griffin to serve as General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, a very important role as the top prosecutor for violations of this country's labor laws. Given his depth of experience and knowledge of the Act, Mr. Griffin is exceptionally well qualified for this position. I have no doubt that he'll do an outstanding job of enforcing our nation's labor laws for workers, for unions, and for employers. In July, we confirmed 5 new NLRB board members, preventing the agency from shutting down and giving it a full slate of members for the first time in a decade. With a fully functional 5-member board and a new Senate-confirmed general counsel, it's my hope that we can provide this important agency with some much-needed certainty, mark a new positive chapter for the NLRB, and finally put an end to the delay and obstruction that has recently become all too familiar every time a new NLRB nominee is appointed. Now, without relitigating the previous controversies, I think it's fair to say that over the past few years, the NLRB has been the target of unnecessary political attacks and obstruction. What most concerns me about this political game playing is how it affects the everyday lives of working people across America. These attacks on the board have had real consequences for real people. Working Americans need and deserve a fully functioning agency to protect their rights and enforce our nation's labor laws. That's why over 75 years ago, Congress enacted the National Labor Relations Act, guaranteeing American workers the right to form and join a union and to bargain for a better life. For both union and non-union workers alike, the Act provides essential protections. It gives workers a voice in the workplace, allows them to join together and speak up for fair wages and good benefits and safe working conditions. These rights ensure that the people who do the real work in this country see the benefits when our economy grows and aren't mistreated or put at risk on the job. The National Labor Relations Board is the guardian of these fundamental rights. Workers themselves cannot enforce the National Labor Relations Act. The board is the only place where workers can go if they have been treated unfairly and denied the basic protections that the law provides. Thus, the board plays a vital role in vindicating workers' rights. In the past 10 years, the NLRB has secured opportunities for reinstatement for 22,544 employees who were unjustly fired. It has also recovered more than $1 billion on behalf of workers whose rights were violated. I know many times people think, well, you know, a lot of these old abuses of workers that you read about in your history books, well, that's just history, and we've gotten over that. Quite frankly, I wish that were the truth. But the fact that in 10 years, 22,544 employees were reinstated because they were unjustly fired indicates that there's still unfair labor practices being committed by businesses today. And $1 billion recovered on behalf of workers just in the last 10 years. That's $1 billion that unscrupulous companies took from their workers without the right to do so. And the NLRB got that money back for workers. Think about that, $1 billion. Now, the board doesn't just protect the rights of workers and unions, it also provides relief and remedies to our nation's employers, our businesses. The board is an employer's only recourse if a union commences a wildcat strike, for example, or refuses to bargain in good faith during negotiations. By preventing labor disputes that could disrupt our economy, the work that the board does is vital to every worker and every business across the nation. Now, further, the NLRB, you have to understand, is divided into two independent sides. There's the board side, which adjudicates and interprets the law. Then there's the general counsel side, which investigates filed charges, prosecutes violations, and generally supervises the processing of cases. The general counsel position is important because the NLRB receives about 20,000 to 30,000 charges per year from employees, unions, and employers. And it is the primary function of the general counsel to make sure that these charges, each charge, is thoroughly investigated and prosecuted if it's determined to have merit. The general counsel also serves an important role that some of my colleagues may not know about. The attorneys in the general counsel's office help facilitate settlements to resolve disputes efficiently. For example, when two unions picketed Walmart in 2012, Walmart filed a claim with the NLRB, and the agency negotiated a settlement. Indeed, settlements are not the exception at NLRB, but the rule, and they are encouraged. In fact, over 90% of meritorious unfair labor practice cases are settled by agreement, either through a board settlement or a private agreement by the two sides. Now that I've discussed the importance of the NLRB in protecting rights and the role of the General Counsel that plays at that agency, I want to turn the page and talk about Mr. Griffin, the nominee who is before us now to be the General Counsel. And I want to again indicate why I strongly support his nomination. Richard Griffin has a wealth of experience as a labor lawyer. He's deeply steeped in labor and employment law. He most recently served as an NLRB board member himself from January 2012 until just this past August. Prior to that, Mr. Griffin was General Counsel for the International Union of Operating Engineers for more than 17 years. Mr. Griffin actually began his legal career over 30 years ago at the NLRB as a counsel to board members. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have agreed that Dick Griffin is well qualified to serve as General Counsel. Indeed, I think his expertise in labor law is difficult to question. But some of my friends on the Republican side continue to oppose his nomination because of an outstanding legal issue that has nothing to do with Mr. Griffin's previous public service, his background, or his ability to function in this new position. Well, here's what this is all about. Much has been made about the process by which Mr. Griffin was previously recess appointed to serve as a board member. The controversy began when the D.C., the District of Columbia Circuit Court, issued a ruling in a case which is called the Noel Canning case that diverged from the decisions of three other courts of appeals, the Second Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, and the 11th Circuit. And that circuit court, D.C. Circuit Court, questioned the validity of an appointment, and my friends on the Republican side are questioning the validity of an appointment process that's been in place for over 220 years. And that was the decision in the Noel Canning case. Subsequently, two other appeals courts have addressed this issue. The Supreme Court is set to resolve the legal issue once and for all during this session of the Supreme Court. So, again, sum it up, we have different circuit courts deciding differently on an appointment process that any president uses to fill recess appointments. So this litigation is still pending. The legal question remains unresolved until the Supreme Court decides it. But a number of my colleagues, during that period when we had different circuit courts deciding differently on this appointment issue, a number of my colleagues on the Republican side called for Mr. Griffin to resign his position on the board, even though he had done nothing personally wrong and he had taken an oath of office to fulfill his duties. Now, I believe that that request from my Republican colleagues was unreasonable. There was clear precedent at the board for Mr. Griffin to continue to serve until the final legal matter was ultimately resolved. When there is a split among the circuit courts of appeals, the NLRB has a long-standing history of waiting until the legal question is resolved by the Supreme Court before they take action, particularly when the issue involves the board's operability. The situation that was facing the board after this Noel Canning case is directly parallel to a similar circumstance faced by the board a few years ago when the board only had two members. And the D.C. Circuit ruled in a case called the Laurel Bay case that the two-member board lacked a quorum to do business. Even after the D.C. Circuit's decision, the two-member board, one Republican, one Democrat, continued to hear and issue cases until the Supreme Court ruled on the question. Not a single Republican senator called on either one of those two board members to resign simply because they refused to acquiesce to the decision of the D.C. Circuit. So here's what happened. Mr. Griffin and his fellow recess appointee, Sharon Block, acted appropriately in following this direct precedent and continuing to serve on the board until the Supreme Court addressed the validity of their recess appointments. To argue that Mr. Griffin's decision to uphold his oath of office and follow the board's prior practice, that somehow that makes him unqualified to now serve as the board's general counsel, is, quite frankly, a position, I think, that is not only disappointing, but I think without substance. In addition to this questionable objection, Republicans also continue to claim that recent NLRB nominees, including Mr. Griffin, are unacceptable simply because they have worked on behalf of workers or unions and support our system of collective bargaining. These nominees have been accused of being biased and unfit to serve. But now I want to point out what the law actually says. Keep in mind, when board members, as well as general counsel, are appointed to the board, and we confirm them, they take an oath of office to uphold the law. So it's kind of interesting to note what the law actually says, that they are sworn by oath to uphold. I've often quoted from the National Labor Relations Act on this point. I will do so again here. Here's what the law says, the National Labor Relations Act. The law that board members, and eventually Mr. Griffin, if he is confirmed, and I believe he will be, will take an oath of office to uphold. Here's the law. I will quote it exactly as it's written. It is declared to be the policy of the United States to eliminate the causes of certain substantial obstructions to the free flow of commerce and to mitigate and eliminate these obstructions when they have occurred by encouraging the practice and procedure of collective bargaining and by protecting the exercise by workers of full freedom of association, self-organization, and the designation of representatives of their own choosing for the purpose of negotiating the terms and conditions of their employment or other mutual aid or protection. End quote. Those are the exact words. That's what the law says. The purpose and the policy is to promote collective bargaining, and freedom of association, protecting workers of their rights of self-organization, the designation of representatives of their own choosing. That's what the law says. The fact that Mr. Griffin takes that purpose seriously, I think, makes him more qualified, not less qualified, to serve as general counsel. His past career is not cause for concern. Most labor lawyers devote their careers either to representing workers and unions or the management. That's the nature of practicing labor and employment law. Now, we have confirmed NLRB nominees in the past, some of whom have been union side and some have been management side, and we've done so without substantial controversy. The fact that Mr. Griffin happens to come from union side practice did not make him inherently biased. For years, Republican and Democratic presidents have appointed pro-management attorneys to fill positions at the NLRB. There's even one example where a board member came directly from an in-house position at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But I don't hear anyone on the Republican side accusing those nominees of bias. I guess it's only when you represent labor unions that you're biased, not when you represent the Chamber of Commerce. I'd also like to point out that while I certainly haven't agreed with the politics or ideology of every past NLRB nominee, I voted to support Republican nominees, like Philip Miscamara and Harry Johnson, who are on the board now, not because I agreed with them, but because given their experience and their diverse backgrounds, they were qualified to serve. They were qualified. As is Mr. Griffin, eminently well qualified. Board members can and do separate their past work as an advocate from their work as a neutral interpreter of the Act once they are confirmed. And I am absolutely sure that Mr. Griffin would do the same if confirmed as General Counsel. I have every confidence that Mr. Griffin will be, in the words of one of the current board members, not pro-union, not pro-worker, not pro-management, but pro-act, pro-National Labor Relations Act, or put maybe more succinctly, pro-law enforcement. With this in mind, and for all the reasons I've just mentioned, I urge all of my colleagues, my Republican colleagues, to consider voting for Mr. Griffin because he deserves a strong bipartisan vote. As I stated earlier, I voted for Republican members. When we had board members here earlier this year, in July, if I'm not mistaken, in July of this year, Democrats voted for the two Republican nominees, again, not because we agreed with them ideologically, or maybe where they were coming from, but they were qualified to serve. They were qualified to serve. And yet, when we have nominees with whom the Republicans are opposed ideologically, even though they are well qualified, Republicans vote no. Think about that. When we have nominees for the National Labor Relations Board that the Republicans support, to whom we may be opposed ideologically, but they are qualified, we vote for them. Democrats vote for them. When we have nominees for the National Labor Relations Board who are well qualified, but whom the Republicans disagree with ideologically, they vote against them. Quite a difference. Well, now is the time to start breaking that down. It didn't used to be this way. It never was this way in the past. If they were qualified under a Republican president, we would support them. Democratic president, we would support them. We just want to know what were their qualifications, what were their backgrounds, were they vetted properly? No criminal activity, nothing in their background that would indicate that they couldn't judiciously act openly and fairly. So I'm sorry that it's gotten to this position now where Republicans feel that they've got to vote against someone for the National Labor Relations Board simply because that person was a lawyer for a labor union. I voted for NLRB members who were lawyers for businesses. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Why do my Republican colleagues have such a problem in voting for someone who is a lawyer for a labor union? Labor unions are legal entities protected by national law, the National Labor Relations Act. So I hope, again, that my Republican colleagues will look at Mr. Griffin for who he is, for what he is, for his background, eminently well qualified, always been fair, always been judicious, a good lawyer. Yes, he represented labor unions, but in all of the vetting that we had in our committee on Mr. Griffin, we had people from the business side and others all said he represented labor unions, but he did so fairly. He did that fairly, with competence, and with the ability to work out agreements with the other side. What more could you ask for? So I'm hopeful that this vote tomorrow will mark a new beginning for the National Labor Relations Board. We'll have a vote on cloture, and then we'll have an up and down vote. So we have 60 votes for cloture to bring it to a vote. Then there will be up to 8 hours of debate on the nominee. I don't think we need to take that long. But I am hopeful that some of my Republican colleagues will vote for Mr. Griffin and break this thing down where if it's someone appointed by a Democratic president, Republicans vote no. If it's someone appointed by a Republican president, Democrats vote no. That shouldn't be the way it should be. Not the way it's been in my lifetime here. In all my time in the Senate, I've served with two Republican presidents here in the Senate. I'm sorry, 3 Republican presidents here in the Senate. And they've made nominations to the National Labor Relations Board. I've been on this committee since then. We always supported them, as long as they were qualified. And they went through the vetting process, and they were qualified. It's fine. The president should have his nominees, and we'd vote for them. Well, I'm hopeful we'll get back to that. I hope we'll have a new era here where the agency is no longer haunted by political attacks, political games. It's time, long past time, to allow the NLRB to function like the law intends and let the dedicated public servants who work there do their jobs. So, Madam President, we will have this vote, I'm told, tomorrow afternoon on cloture. As I said, for the benefit of senators, we'll have up to 8 hours. I don't imagine we'll take all of that. We'll have up to 8 hours of debate on the nominee. And again, I hope we have a good, strong vote on both cloture and on the nomination himself, on the nominee himself. Mr. Griffin, as I said, eminently well qualified. Eminently well qualified. Nothing in his background would ever indicate that he would be anything less than an outstanding counsel at the National Labor Relations Board. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.